method of how to take a problem to a solution. Now, it only works if you work it. It only works if you, you've got to surrender the problem. And what we recommend is what I thought I'd do the next couple of weeks or 3 weeks is go through the steps, and I'm sure all of you have worked them. And what we do, we work them the first time, and then we continue to work them until they become a working part of the mind and body. They become automatic, but we can't stop learning about the steps and doing the steps. Like I said, it becomes a way of life. So the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous was written in the 1930s by Bill W. And they said a group of 100 recovering alcoholics, but actually Bill wrote it. He did get input from the other 100, but basically Bill wrote the book. And the 12 steps is, it starts on 63, and it tells, talks about how to go through the steps, but actually, it's called How It Works. And I was turning over here to this. So, step 1 is, see, the steps are a simple program for complicated people. We complicate them so much. And there's been masters that have dissected them and have, and I've sat through lots and lots and lots of week-long step studies, and, and I've enjoyed and loved every one of them. But the basic thing is, if you don't do step 1, if you don't get step 1, you've missed the entire program. Because what step 1 is, we were admitted that we were powerless, that powerlessness, we admitted we were powerless over. And you can put, it was designed for alcoholics, and so it was the original text. It says, we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Now that is step 1. Now you can do a lot with dissecting step 1. And just admitting it does not mean that there's been a lot of change made. We are admitting, okay, I have a problem. And that's really, I'm not shortchanging this first step, but that's really all the first step is figuring out what is the problem. For alcoholics, compulsive overeaters, people with eating disorders, drug addicts, anyone that has had any sort of problem, you can ask them, and they overeat because their husband's not loving. They drink because their wife's a bitch. They drink because their husband is, they don't have a good husband. They drink for this. They drink for, there's all sorts of reasons that we use a substance. And the main reason we use a substance is because if you drink one drink and you want another one, see, the craving is not set up until you put the substance in your body. What we have before we take the first drink or the first addictive bite of whatever we might be addicted to is the thought precedes the action. Now, until we put the substance in our body, the craving isn't set up. What we have is the mental obsession. The first step is a two-part step. There is a physical component, and there's a mental and emotional side. And those two together render us powerless over whatever the substance is. And how we reach that stage of powerlessness is, and for some it takes a long time, because somewhere in an addict's brain they think, I can do this, and they will get clean and sober, or they'll stop overeating, or they'll stop whatever they're doing, and then they think, okay, I'm good now, and they forgot the other part of the step is our lives had become unmanageable. So for any addict, a normal person can have a drink, maybe two. Most normies will, maybe go to dinner and have a glass of wine, and that's all they want. Or they can have, you go to a wedding. Well, there's my friend James Lumpkin. They can go to a wedding. I bet James has gone to lots of weddings. He's a minister. So a person with an eating disorder, compulsive overeater, a normie can go to a wedding or any social function where they serve, like at weddings, they serve cake, and they never give you very much. They just give you these little old pieces of cake. And for a normie, someone that doesn't have that addiction to sugar, they may pass on the cake altogether, or they may get a piece, and you get to see the normie standing around, because they'll take a bite or two of that cake, and then they'll say, oh my goodness, this is so rich, and they'll put it down. For a compulsive overeater, we've never found, when we're in the disease, nothing is too rich. It's like what it does, if you have that sugar allergy, and it has the sugar, the white flour, it has the whole ball of wax, but if you do have that sugar intolerance, that sugar addiction, what one bite does, it sets up a craving. The craving is not there before you put the first drink or the first bite in your mouth. What is present, those two things, the physical component, which it's definitely a physical component, any addiction is, are really, any process addiction really affects us physically. And then the second part of that is that mental and emotional side, and those two together equals powerlessness. When we have that, and it meant, when we have those two things, and we cannot stop using after one drink, what that produces, those two things produces what we call is the mental obsession. See, normies don't have that. If you try to talk to a normal person about a mental obsession, they really don't know what you're talking about. They may somewhat, let's say, you're at a function, maybe you do have that sugar allergy, or maybe you're somewhere where they're serving alcohol and you're an alcoholic. But let's say if you have an eating disorder, maybe a sugar addiction, and you can't hardly pay attention to what is going on in the room for thinking about back there in the back all of those desserts that they have spread out. You cannot go to a church function without all of the fine bakery goods, that everyone brings. And so the disease starts in the mind. It starts in the brain. It starts in the thinking about those sweets back there, or getting off work for an alcoholic and going and getting a drink. And the more you think about it, the more that's all you can think about, that mental obsession. The mental obsession is what separates the normies from an addict. Think about it. The mental obsession. It's an idea that overcomes all other ideas. Do any of you know what I'm talking about? Shake your head if you know what I'm talking about. Okay, the mental obsession. And if you're codependent, you can get that going with in codependency. You can get into Al-Anon, or you can get into Coda, and you'll swear off of rescuing people, and you're not going to do that anymore, and you're not going to rescue an alcoholic. You're not going to, you're tired of getting them out of jail, or you're tired of whatever, and so you swear off. And what happens then, even with someone that doesn't use any substance, if you're codependent, that mental obsession can still be there. I mean, you can be sitting at work, and what you will think about is your loved one that is an addict. That's all you can think about. What I can do for them, what I should have done, why didn't I do this instead? Why didn't I do this? Why, and it's that chatter that goes on in the brain. So, step one, like I said, is the most important. All the steps are important, but step one is the most important step, because if you miss step one, you've missed it all. Step one is figuring out what is the problem here. And, for people that have an addiction, they want it, like I said a while ago, they want it to be everyone else. Well, it's my parents, well, it's my wife, it's my finances, it's, my relationship, it's my job, it's the heat, it's the cold, it is something outside ourselves. And this is what's so hard for an addict, particularly if they have a good enabler around. The only time any of us, regardless of what the problem is, but if you're an addict, the only time that any of us want any help is if we feel and reach that moment of powerlessness. If we don't feel the powerlessness, we think on some level we can fix it, or someone can fix the problem, and that we really aren't addicts. That's what we tell ourselves, and that we can quit anytime. And as long as any addict has that mentality, they will never, ever, ever get clean and sober, or get in recovery for any addiction. Because, self-centeredness is the center of the problem. And I'll be talking about that more in step 3. But really the problem of any addiction is self-centeredness. I want what I want when I want it. So the first step is, like I said, is the most important. And if you don't, people call it taking the first step. If you don't take the first step and acknowledge, it's about acknowledging the powerlessness. And we recommend that that you're sober when you work the steps. A lot of people try to work them while drunk. They probably can get some help out of it, particularly in OA. I was, I mean, I don't grandstand anything anymore, but years ago, I would be kind of, against very overweight people getting up and talking about how to work the steps. And what, we called them, maybe they have worked the steps and we call it having fat serenity, and I was the judge of that. I would judge them, and so who am I to say that you can't work the steps while using? But I do recommend, I think it is better if you can get clean and sober and abstinent before you work the steps. If not, work them, and then maybe perhaps you can find sobriety along the way. And sobriety is, the definition that I use for sobriety is being clean in every substance or behavior. Every substance or behavior. Now think about that. People, and particularly alcoholics, drug addicts, and it is a wonderful thing to get clean and sober. And the thing about it, it's killing them. And so when they get clean and sober, if they don't work the steps, this is a spiritual problem. And if they don't find a spiritual solution, what it does is that addicts have such a hole in our soul. And we try to find something to fill up that hole in the soul. And nothing, absolutely nothing can fill up that space, that hole in our soul, other than the God of our understanding. So, like I started this, and it's more with people with eating disorders that I see this. No, it's with addicts. What I see with any addict, they can get clean and sober, and if they don't continue to treat the disease on a daily basis, they'll switch addictions. They have to have something to fill up that hole in the soul. I've seen many alcoholics turn to food. Even the, early days of, it was actually before my husband ever sobered up, but we had this big old house and we had a playroom attached to the house. It was really big. It had a loft to sleep in. It was very nice. It had its own kitchen, its own bathroom, and so I got real active in the Al-Anon program, and I'd go to open AA meetings, and I got well acquainted with, people in town in the recovery community, and then I started working in a drug alcohol treatment center, and I don't know where I was going with that, but where was it? I'll get back to where I was. That's the thing about almost being 82. I can hardly remember what I had for breakfast, but it's easy because I've quit eating breakfast. But anyway, I would see the alcoholics and drug addicts that we've treated at the Serenity House, and then I would see them at open AA meetings. That was before I declared my own self an alcoholic. But anyway, I'd go to open AA meetings, and it could be visual. They would switch addictions. They would start putting on weight because they would eat. Even in AA meetings, a lot of times, I know the meeting that I went to for many, many years, at the AA meeting that I'd go to, at noon, the Horizon group, you go in there and there'd be candy bars all up and down the table. And they'd say, come on here, have a candy bar, one won't hurt you. and they have no understanding of eating disorders, and a lot of them have them themselves. So my point is, being clean and sober is being sober in every area. And now a fresh alcoholic, when they're first, the first rattle out of the box, the first addiction that they are addressing, you don't address all of them at one time. If you can get clean and sober, go for it. And then later on, you'll have to look at, more than likely, look at the other addictions that you picked up. One of the things that I see with women, particularly women with eating disorders, and it's particularly compulsive overeaters and bulimics, and not so much your anorexics. Anorexics a lot of times are as tight with their money as they are with food. They don't like to spend their money, and they hold their money real close. Compulsive overeaters and bulimics, a lot of times in recovery, will switch from food to spending. And I know I did. And then another thing, and we see this really a lot in the bariatric surgery. I say a lot, maybe 20, I think it's 20-30%. I spoke in Nashville at a bariatric surgery conference, and I was so surprised that those doctors, and I'm not faulting them, but anyway, that they never once in that whole 3-day conference mentioned switching addictions, or that it was an addiction. It was just treated as a health issue. But what happened, and research showed, when they have the surgery, the bariatric surgery, it changes the metabolism. And a lot of times, women particularly can become instant alcoholics. They a lot of times will switch over to a little wine drinking. That's what I did, and will switch over to alcohol and become an instant alcoholic. We've treated many of them like that, to where they had been able to drink maybe a glass of wine at dinner or something, but after the surgery, like I said, their metabolism changed, 2 drinks and they were drunk. Another thing that we have seen is, particularly with eating disorder clients, particularly with your overweight, they lose the weight, they get to looking good, and they get to feeling frisky. And I have seen this happen, where they'll switch addictions into finding them a new sweet thing. Or they may not want to divorce the one they have, but they'll get someone on the side. I've seen it because they feel good, they look good. A lot of times they married their spouse when they were overweight, and they might not have even chose that one. But once they lose the weight and they're just feeling good about themselves, I've seen it more than once that happen. And then, if they do start maybe going and doing a little bar hopping, not only then are they, maybe getting into some love and sex addiction, then they can use alcohol and become alcoholic. So the thing about step 1 is, we have to admit we are powerless, that left to our own devices, that we cannot solve our problem. And I see many, many, many addicts, somewhere along the line, they think they can solve the problem, or mom and dad can solve the problem, or their spouse can solve the problem, and I'll tell you, without help, the family will do everything that they can to help an addict, which is the worst thing that family members can do. People used to tell me early on that I was helping kill 3 perfectly good alcoholics: my mother, my husband, and my daughter. because they said about the time they got down and reached some form of a bottom, they might be 1 inch away from bottom from actually wanting some help, and I'd rush in and rescue them. I love them. I love them dearly, and it was so hard for me to watch them suffer. I didn't want them to suffer. Now, what I've come to learn, if you don't feel the pain of the disease, you'll never reach the point of powerlessness. You'll never reach that point of powerlessness. And if you don't reach the point of powerlessness, we never give up. We never surrender. So step one really is really about figuring out what the problem is. And this is where it comes in. You can use the 12 steps with any problem, but you've got to stop in the midst of the problem, whatever's going on, and ask yourself, what is the problem here? I'll give you, once you do this, you work the steps in your mind. It becomes a working part of the mind. Yesterday, my housekeeper I had to go to the doctor. Anyway, I don't normally clean my house, but I was out of town and I came in, and my house never gets real dirty, but I wanted to clean it, so I got to cleaning the house. And then I got to seeing some things or hearing some things about one of the appointees that our new president has made. And I got to thinking, and that is so dangerous for an addict to think. Even a recovering addict, it is not good for a recovering addict to think too much, because we get to thinking. And while I was vacuuming and mopping, I just got me a case going. And I got irritable, restless, and get discontented. And I came in here and said something to Misty. Thank God I didn't linger long. I didn't say everything I wanted to say, because I caught myself. I figured out what I was doing, and I went off back where I was doing my vacuuming and my mopping, and I thought, what is the problem here with you this morning, Tennie? What is the problem? And this is what step one really is. The word came to me. One word, it's called the big C. It's about control. When I get into that stuff, really anything that I can focus on that I think somebody else needs to change about them or something, I can get into the control. I don't do as much about it today, but it can live rent-free between my two ears. The control, want to change this, why didn't they do that, what are they, and it's just that, so I had to stop, and I got in there in that foyer, and I said, God, help me to shut my mouth. Help me. That's the powerlessness of that control and the need to be right and the need to convince someone else that you're right and that they will agree with you. That is codependency. So I had a codependency breakdown yesterday. And the steps work, because what you do, and we will get to step 10 later on, of course not today, but what step 10 is taking the first 9 steps every day, over the first 9 steps, and you can quickly take them in your mind. Step 1, I was powerless over my mind and over my control over what I wanted Misty to agree with something with me, and she wouldn't even talk to me about it. She's putting up a Christmas tree, and when I get in one of those moods, she ignores me. She acts like she's listening to music, but she's really ignoring me. No comment. And it dawned on me, I was wasting so much time and energy and it didn't make me feel good. So I took step one. What is the problem? Control. That was the problem. And then immediately, step two is came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. I needed to be restored to sanity in that minute, in that moment. I needed to be restored. And then in step three, you make a decision. Do you want to stay in that I want to stay in that irritable mood, or did I want to get out of it? Did I want a solution? That's what step three is making a decision, which way you want to go. Do I want to turn it over to God, or do I want to keep stewing in it, And I mean, like that, I got to feeling better. Step one, step two, step three. And then four, I took a quick inventory and noticed I can be a control freak in some areas. Now, I know those who know me well, that this is a very big surprise to y'all, that I can say I'm a control freak in some areas. I'm not near like I used to be, thank God, and it is God. So the solution to any problem, well, first, like step one, is that we must figure out what is the problem. That is really all step one is in realizing the powerlessness. And the powerlessness is getting so miserable that you can't stand yourself. Have y'all ever done that? Had a problem and got so miserable? If you haven't, keep on doing the problem. Keep churning it in your mind over and over and over and over. You keep trying to come up with the solution. How much has that been working for you? If when we have the problem, and sometimes I just enjoy stewing in a mess, I guess, because, I'll do it until I get out of it, but I don't stay as long as I used to. And I don't do as much damage. Now, sometimes poor Misty, she gets all of I'll save everything, for her. And she gets my bad mood, she gets my criticism, she gets my control, and she just goes on and puts up that Christmas tree and ignores me, or whatever she's doing. So that's why she's my assistant. She assists me to stay sane. So powerlessness is not the same as hopelessness. When we admit powerlessness, what it is a step toward hope and healing. People think, well, if I admit that I am powerless, and a lot of people that's not in the program, they don't like that. They say, well, AA is trying to take away your manhood or your whole being. You've got to be powerless. I'm not, and it's about hope is on the other side of powerlessness. Hope is on the other side of powerlessness, and if we don't, can't feel that in our very soul, that we are powerless over our behavior, powerless over overeating, undereating, whatever drinking, drugs, alcohol. If we are not powerless over it and admit that we're powerless, we'll never get to the other side of hope and healing. So one of the things that's important, and I'm talking, this will go on, Facebook and all
yes, and YouTube.
And YouTube, and perhaps people will hear this that have never worked the steps. So I want to tell you a little bit about I jotted down some things and I could hardly read my writing. That's what happens when everything goes when you get old. Okay, so one of the things you do is find someone to share your story with. And that someone is someone that has been down the road that you're on. Don't go share your story with another drunk, wait and, because they'll just agree with you. Share your story with someone that is farther along, that's finding a solution to the problem that you have, and share your story with them. And that's one of the most powerful things in the whole 12-step process, is sharing with like kind, finding someone. You cannot go to AA and talk about eating disorders or sex addiction or whatever. It's not appropriate. You go to AA to get clean and to get clean and sober. Used to, when I first went into the field, we couldn't even talk about drug addiction. They kept it completely separated. This has been years ago. And so you couldn't, drug addicts couldn't even go to AA and talk about using drugs. But finally, through lots of research, and they realized that alcohol is but a drug, and a drug is a drug is a drug. It doesn't matter whether you drink it, shoot it up, take it in tablet form, whatever. It is a drug. And so it's important to get with like kind, somebody that has been there. So I remember early on with my going to open AA meetings, and I was ignorant. I did not know this, and I would try to talk about my food. And boy, they'd stop me in a heartbeat, and they'd say, I remember one old timer, there was a basket of candy there, and he said, "Here, honey, just have a Snickers bar," because they have no understanding of the devastation of an eating disorder. So that's why it's important to talk with like kind. If you haven't been down that road, if you haven't been to New York City, you can't tell anybody how to get back from there or anywhere. If you haven't been to Iceland, and by the way, I went this summer, but if you haven't been to Iceland, you can't tell anybody how to get back from there. So unless you're an alcoholic, a recovering alcoholic, you have no idea what it's like. Or if you are not a compulsive overeater and, weighed over 100 pounds, you have no idea what that's like. Or you can be a compulsive overeater and be within a normal weight range and still be a compulsive overeater, because how that works, a person can overeat and then think, oh my God, I'm going to gain weight, and the next day restrict, and maybe restrict the next day, and then overeat the next day. And that is an eating disorder. But very few people would see it as that, and I have had clients that have suffered for years with that on and off and on and off, but they maintain their weight. So anyway, it's important to get with like kind, someone that has walked the path that you have walked. And then that goes for family members. It is so important for family members to have someone to talk to. If you have watched a loved one almost die of drugs, alcohol, eating disorders, anorexia. Anorexia really is has the highest death rate of any psychiatric diagnosis that there is. And I had a daughter that, by the grace of God, is recovering from anorexia. And it was back in the Twiggy days. Twiggy is later than Twiggy, but the kids, everybody had been affected by that, being thin. And so, if I would try to talk to my daughter, or if I would try to talk to anyone else about her thinness, they would say, well, you might take some lessons from her, so, because I would be overweight. Anyway, it's just important for family members to, if you have an alcoholic or drug addict child or relative, or if you have an eating disorder person, go to Al-Anon. Go to Al-Anon. Now, in Al-Anon, what qualifies you for Al-Anon is to have a family member that's an alcoholic, and so that is your qualifier. But I will tell you, most Al-Anon meetings will let you talk about having a family member that's dying from an eating disorder. Now, sometimes they have eating disorders themselves, and I've had lots of people ask me that. So anyway, I'm getting off the subject. So I'm going to give you one of the things that for people that have never worked the steps, the first thing you can do is find someone that has gone down the path you're going down and share your story. Like I said, family members, go to Al-Anon and share your story, and every one of the people in there can identify with you. And they, now you go the first few times and they want you to tell your story, and after that, they want you to start talking recovery talk. They won't let you linger in your story. And a lot of times when the family, this is a tricky deal, when the family gets healthy, you'll be amazed at what happens to the addict. I mean, I've seen it over and over and over. When I took hands off, what I was told was get off my husband's back, get out of his way, and go on with my own life. And I did, and I gave up that he might not ever get sober. And guess what? Putting the problem back on him, one day he decided that he did have a problem, that it wasn't just me pointing it out. And he went to AA, and when he died, he had 32 years of sobriety. Okay, number one, share your story with someone that understands. And then number two, seek support. Go to a support group. Go to whatever you qualify for, AA, NA, OA. There is more 12-step programs all over the United States, particularly in large cities, for any problem or addiction or mental illness that you might have. Seek out help and go and listen to what other people, how they're treating whatever addiction or problem they have. Number three is stay open. Stay open. Be willing to let go of the control and accept help. That's the thing right there with so many addicts. They have such a fear of who will they be if they give up control of the substance, because it becomes such a way of life. Another thing is reflect on the patterns of behavior. Write down specific situations where you've had where you couldn't control your addiction. Write it down. When you're sober, when you're clean, or you're abstinent, write down the days, what it felt like not to be in control of your substance. And by the way, we can't control it. We can take the action, and God can and will take over the reins and give us the control. So acknowledge the consequences. This is another assignment in one column. Write ways your addiction has affected your life, and this is an addiction to people, places, and things. If you're addicted to an addict, if you're addicted to alcohol, if you're addicted to food, write down, make a column of ways that your addiction has affected your life. For instance, if you're overweight and you ride on an airplane and you have to ask for an extension, that's one of the consequences. write them down. And then, if you're a compulsive spender, write how the consequences of your spending. Or your work addiction. If you're a work addict, write down the consequences of your work addiction. Missing your children's special occasions. Being in that brown fog, where alcoholics have blackouts, work addicts have what we call brownouts. They just have they live almost in a haze. And all they have tunnel vision for work. So write that down, and the people that you've, the consequences that you've had being a work addict. And then the last column, write how it's affected your loved ones, friends, co-workers, family members. Get honest about how your addiction or your behavior has affected your loved ones. And then the third thing is recognize the illusion of control. Guess what? We do not have control. When we think we do, we don't. But write down ways that you have tried to quit being in control. If you're trying to not be in control, the thing about it is you're aware of it. So write those things down. Write a personal definition of powerlessness. Write your personal declaration of what powerlessness is. And learn somehow to enjoy the moment that you're in. So, step one is admitting I'm powerless over whatever you're powerless over, and that our lives have become unmanageable. And that unmanageability comes comes after the powerlessness. And so that's what I have. I've got some scholars of the big book on here. I've got some really heavy-duty recovering people here. So speak up, add what it was like when you worked the first step the first time. Who wants to start?